Move that cripple somewhere else. The loud, hateful voice cut through the diner the moment the door opened. The entire room went silent. Standing at the entrance was a man leaning heavily on his crutches. Beside him was a powerful K9 wearing a service dog vest. The young waitress, Emily, looked at the man and smiled immediately. "Sir, you can sit here." The man nodded, his face weary but calm. "Thank you." He sat down, placing his crutches aside. Rex, his K9, lay quietly at his feet, but minutes later, the door opened again. 3 men walked in. Suddenly, Rex stood up. He walked to the door and blocked the exit. The setting was a small, weather-beaten diner in Boston, tucked away near the harbor. The air inside smelled of roasted coffee, fried bacon, and the salty breeze from the Atlantic. It was the kind of place where locals gathered for a cheap lunch and a warm, honest conversation. On this particular afternoon, the diner was packed to its absolute capacity. The lunchy rush was at its peak, and the heat from the kitchen made the air thick. Every booth was filled with construction workers, office clerks, and elderly couples. The main server working that day was Emily Carter. Emily was 24 years old, a nursing student working double shifts to pay for her education. She was the heart of the diner. Even during the most chaotic and stressful shifts, she remained kind. She treated every customer like family, regardless of who they were. When the bell above the door chimed, the atmosphere shifted instantly. A man stepped inside, moving slowly with the help of heavy metal crutches. He wore an old, olive-green tactical jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Beside him, a German shepherd moved with military precision and absolute focus. The dog wore a tactical vest that read, "Service dog, do not pet." Curiously, many customers didn't look at the man's face. They looked at his legs. They looked at the heavy braces supporting them. One customer at a corner table sneered. He made a nasty comment about handicapped people taking up space. He complained about a filthy animal being in a restaurant. The man on crutches didn't flinch. He didn't even look toward the source of the insult. This was Daniel Brooks. He was 35 years old, but his soul felt a century old. Daniel was a former Navy SEAL, a member of the world's most elite unit. He had spent his youth in the darkest corners of the world. He had executed missions that were never written in history books, protecting the lives of millions. He had been a warrior of the highest order, a master of stealth and survival. But a mission gone wrong in the mountains had shattered his body. An explosion had claimed his mobility, but it hadn't claimed his spirit. Since leaving the military, Daniel lived a quiet, almost invisible life in a small apartment. He avoided the spotlight. He didn't want people to thank him for his service. He just wanted to blend into the background of a world he no longer understood. But he wasn't truly alone. Rex, his K9 partner, had served in the same elite unit. Rex wasn't just a pet. He was a highly trained tactical operator. Rex was Daniel's ears, his balance, and his early warning system. He was trained to detect threats before they became visible to the human eye. He could detect a spike in Daniel's heart rate before Daniel even felt a panic attack. In the SEAL teams, they had a saying, "The dog is the first one in." Rex lived by that code every single day of his life. As Daniel stood at the entrance, leaning heavily on his crutches, he looked at Emily with tired eyes. His voice was raspy but incredibly polite. "Can I sit here?" he asked softly. Emily didn't hesitate for a second. She quickly cleared a table near the door. "Of course, sir. Right this way. Can I get you some water for your friend here?" Emily asked. Daniel smiled, a rare, genuine smile that touched his eyes. "He'd appreciate that. Thank you, ma'am." A few customers continued to whisper, complaining about the beast near their food. They didn't understand the law. They didn't see the scars hidden under Daniel's jacket. Emily stood her ground, explaining the laws firmly to anyone who dared to complain about the dog. She saw Daniel as a human being, not a tragedy or a burden on society. Daniel ordered a simple meal of beef stew and a cup of strong black coffee. Rex lay perfectly still under the table. His eyes were closed, but his ears were constantly scanning the environment. He was monitoring every sound in the room. To the untrained eye, Rex was sleeping. To Daniel, Rex was on point. He was maintaining a 360-degree perimeter, sensing the energy of every customer. Daniel focused on his coffee, trying to ignore the stares of the judgmental crowd. He often wondered if the sacrifices he made were truly worth it in the end. He looked at the people in the diner, free to eat, free to complain, free to be rude. He didn't resent them for their ignorance. He had fought for that freedom. But sometimes the silence of a civilian life felt louder than the explosions of his past. He lived in a world where duty and honor were just words. To him and Rex, those words were etched into their very skin and fur. They were brothers in arms, forever bonded by the fire of combat and loss. He watched Emily as she moved through the room. She was young, full of life, and possessed a kindness that reminded him of the world he was trying to save. He felt Rex's tail thump once against his leg. It was a silent communication, a reminder that they were a team, no matter where they were or what happened. Daniel took a deep breath, letting the aroma of the diner ground him. For a moment, he felt almost normal. He felt like he belonged in this peaceful place. But the peace was a fragile thing. In the world of a Navy SEAL, you learn that the quiet moments are usually just the eye of a coming storm. If you've ever seen a good person being disrespected just because of their circumstances, type unjust. Daniel began his lunch, the warm steam of the stew fogging his glasses. The diner was still noisy, filled with the hum of 100 different conversations. The sound of clinking silverware and loud laughter filled the room. Emily moved gracefully between the tables, refilling mugs and clearing plates with ease. Everything seemed perfectly normal. It was just another Tuesday afternoon, until the bell above the door rang again with a sharp, aggressive tone. The sound was sudden. It was a warning that Daniel's brain processed faster than anyone else. His tactical training never truly left his mind. 3 men walked in. They weren't dressed like the local harbor workers. They wore oversized hoodies, dark jeans, and heavy tactical boots with thick soles. They didn't look at the menu on the wall. They scanned the cash register in the back exits with cold, calculating eyes that searched for weaknesses. Their movements were twitchy and uncoordinated, signs of high adrenaline or chemical influence. They were sweating despite the cold air outside. The moment they stepped over the threshold, Rex's head snapped up. His body went from relaxed to rock solid in less than a second. Rex didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply stood up. He walked out from under the table with a heavy, purposeful gait that commanded the entire aisle. He positioned his frame directly in the center of the main aisle near the door. He was blocking the only path toward the back of the diner and the kitchen. The 3 men stopped in their tracks. They looked down at the dome. One of them tried to push past, but Rex didn't budge an inch. He was a mountain. He showed his teeth, just a glimpse, and a low, vibrating hum started in his chest. It wasn't a bark, it was a threat, a promise of total violence. Daniel felt the change in the air. He knew that vibration perfectly. In the SEALs, when Rex acted like this, it meant there was a lethal threat nearby. Daniel didn't panic. He slowly reached out and placed a hand on Rex's collar. "Easy, Rex," he whispered. But his eyes were already locked on the men. He noticed the way the man in the lead kept his right hand tucked into his hoodie pocket. The fabric was heavy, weighted down by something metallic. He noticed the way the other 2 were positioning themselves to flank the room, trying to avoid the dog's direct line of sight. They were moving like predators. They were looking for the path of least resistance. The men were agitated. One of them looked at Rex and cursed loudly. "Move that dog, old man!" "We're just looking for a seat," he shouted. Daniel didn't move Rex. "There's plenty of room at the counter," Daniel said with an icy calmness. His voice carried a weight of authority that silenced the entire room. The construction workers at the nearby table stopped eating to watch the scene. The men didn't listen. They tried to move around the dog, but Rex shifted his weight with tactical precision, blocking them again. He was a wall of muscle. Emily walked over, sensing the rising tension. "Is there a problem here, guys?" she asked, her voice slightly trembling. She saw the sweat on their foreheads. She was young, but she wasn't foolish. She saw the cold look in their eyes. One of the men turned on her, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. He was trying to create a scene, a distraction to draw attention away from his friend's hand. Rex didn't move. He stayed near the door, watching the leader. Daniel realized Rex wasn't just guarding him. Rex was guarding the only exit point of the building. He was trapping them in a tactical kill zone. In military K-9 training, Dogs are taught to control choke points. Rex had identified the door as the primary choke point for the entire room. He was ensuring no one could escape without his permission. Daniel felt his old instincts returning. His heart rate stayed low and controlled. His vision sharpened into tunnel vision, focusing only on the primary threats. He began to count the seconds, waiting for the first hostile move. He began to look for makeshift weapons. He knew Rex never acted this way without a reason. Rex could smell the adrenaline and the metallic scent of gun oil. He could smell the sharp, acidic tang of fear coming off the three men. The diner had gone completely quiet. Everyone was watching the pawn and the men. The snide customer who had insulted Daniel earlier was now looking at Rex with genuine fear. Daniel realized that something was about to happen. These weren't just hungry customers. They were men on the edge of doing something desperate. Daniel breathed slowly, centering himself for the fight. He was a man on crutches, but he was still a Navy SEAL, and Rex was still his most loyal and lethal weapon. He gripped the handle of his heavy crutch. He was calculating the distance. He was identifying the primary target. He was ready for the breach. The clock was ticking in his head. He looked at the leader's eyes. He saw the moment the man decided to draw. The air became heavy. The silence was about to be broken by violence. If you've ever misjudged someone before knowing the truth, type, "I was wrong." The tension in the diner was now thick enough to cut with a knife. One of the men, the tallest one, lost his patience and tried to kick Rex out of the way. Rex didn't flinch. He didn't even move his head. He simply leaned into the kick, absorbing the impact with his muscular shoulder. He was solid as iron. Then, he let out a growl that sounded like a tectonic plate shifting. Daniel stood up. It was a slow, painful process that everyone watched in total silence. He leaned on his crutches, his body trembling with the effort. But his eyes were like cold, polished flint. They were the eyes of a professional hunter. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Daniel said softly. His voice was quiet, but it commanded every ear in the room. The air in the diner turned to ice. The tall man laughed, but it was a hollow, nervous sound. "What's a cripple like you gonna do? Call your little puppy off before I hurt him for real." Daniel didn't respond to the insult. He looked at Emily. "Emily, go behind the counter. Now, call the manager. Tell him to stay in the back. Tell him to lock the office door." Emily didn't ask questions. She saw the look in Daniel's eyes. It was the look of a man who had seen the end of the world. She saw a man who knew exactly what was about to happen. The three men realized the situation was spiraling out of their control. They were exposed. The leader reached into his hoodie. He wasn't reaching for a wallet or a phone. Rex didn't wait for a command. He lunged with explosive, terrifying power. He didn't bite, but he threw his 80-pound frame into the leader's chest. The man was knocked back against the glass door with a loud, sickening thud. The man's hoodie pulled back, revealing a snub-nosed revolver tucked into his waistband. A collective gasp of horror went through the diner. People began to scream and scramble for safety. "Get down! Everyone under the tables!" Daniel roared. The command was so powerful the room obeyed. The command was the voice of a chief petty officer on a battlefield. Rex stayed on the leader, pinning him against the door frame with his front paws. The other two men reached for their own pockets, but they were trapped in the narrow aisle. Daniel didn't have a gun, but he had his heavy metal crutches. He swung one crutch with surgical speed, catching the second man across the wrist. A heavy knife clattered to the floor, sliding under a nearby table. Daniel stepped forward, balancing on one leg with a strength that defied his physical condition. "Don't move," Daniel warned the third man. His voice was like iron. The man looked at his friend being pinned by a snarling K9. He looked at his other friend clutching a broken wrist in agony. He put his hands up. He was done. He had never seen a man move like Daniel. Emily was already on the phone with the police, her voice frantic but clear. Within minutes, the faint wail of sirens became a deafening roar. Blue and red lights flashed against the diner's windows like a strobe light. A squad of police officers burst through the door, weapons drawn. Rex didn't move until Daniel gave a sharp, distinctive whistle that only he knew. Only then did the dog back off, allowing the officers to move in and secure the suspects. The police tackled the three men and handcuffed them quickly. As they searched them, they found a stack of cash and jewelry stolen from a store nearby. These guys matched the description from the harbor robbery. They were trying to use this diner as a temporary hideout to wait for a getaway car. The officer in charge walked over to Daniel and looked at his vest. He paused in realization, his eyes widening in deep respect as he recognized the seal insignia. "You're Brooks, aren't you?" the officer asked. "Daniel Brooks? From the SEALs? I saw your face on a training bulletin years ago." Daniel didn't look for praise. He just nodded his head. "Just a guy having lunch. Rex did all the hard work today. I just provided the distraction." The officer turned to the room, his voice loud for all. "You folks don't know how lucky you are. This man is a legend in the special operations community. This dog has more combat hours than my precinct." The diner was silent. The customers who had whispered were now in tears. They saw the scars on his neck. They saw the weight of his service in his eyes. They realized that Rex hadn't been blocking the door to be a nuisance. He had smelled the gunpowder on their clothes. He had sensed the danger. He had blocked the door to protect everyone inside from a potential shootout. Daniel sat back down, his body exhausted from the sudden burst of adrenaline. Rex returned to his spot under the table, resting his head on Daniel's foot. The diner was a mess of chairs and spilled coffee, but everyone was alive. Everyone was safe because a man they mocked had refused to look away. Daniel took a sip of his cold coffee. He didn't feel like a hero or a legend. He just felt like a soldier who had completed another mission, one he hadn't even asked for. He looked at the rude customer from earlier. The man was shaking, unable to speak. Daniel didn't say a word to him. He didn't need to. The truth was written in the handcuffs on the floor. He felt a deep sense of relief, but also a lingering sadness. He was a man who lived in a world of violence, even when he tried to find peace. He patted Rex's head. "Good boy," he whispered. Rex wagged his tail once, then went back to being the silent guardian he was born to be. If you've ever owed your life to someone who protected you in silence, type, "I am indebted." The police finished taking statements and clearing the scene of the crime. The three robbers were dragged away in the back of patrol cars. Their dreams of a quick getaway had been shattered by a service dog and a man on crutches. The diner was slowly returning to a state of quiet. The man who had been the loudest about Daniel's disability earlier walked over. His face was bright red with shame. He couldn't meet Daniel's gaze. I want to apologize," the man whispered, his voice cracking. "I said some terrible things. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know your history. I didn't know what you've done for us. I'm truly sorry." Daniel looked up from his stew. His eyes were tired but filled with a quiet, deep kindness. "You don't need to know who I am to be a decent human being," Daniel said. "A person's value isn't based on their legs or what they can do for you. It's based on how they treat people who have nothing. Remember that the next time you see someone struggling." The man nodded, looking humbled. He reached out a hand to shake. Daniel didn't take it. He wasn't being mean. He was just finished with the conversation. He was exhausted. He was ready for peace. Emily brought over a fresh bowl of hot stew and a new pot of coffee. She also brought a large, unseasoned steak on a white plate. She set it down in front of Rex with a trembling hand and a smile. "This one is on the house," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "For both of you. You saved my life today. I was so scared." Daniel looked at the steak, then at Rex, who was waiting for a command to eat. "Go ahead, buddy," Daniel said. Rex wagged his tail and enjoyed his reward. Other customers began to walk by the table slowly, their heads bowed. They whispered "thank you" or "God bless you" as they left the diner with their lives intact. One old man, a veteran from the Vietnam era, walked over. He stood at attention and saluted Daniel with a tear in his eye. Daniel returned the salute from his seat, a silent bond between warriors. He felt the weight of the moment in his chest. Daniel realized that today wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about showing people the truth. It showed that heroes come in many forms, sometimes on crutches, sometimes on four legs. He finished his meal and reached for his heavy metal crutches. He didn't want the attention. He didn't want a news interview. He just wanted to go home and rest his body. He was done with the world for today. Emily walked him to the door and held it open for him. "Please come back soon, Daniel," she said. "You're always welcome here in this diner. You have a table reserved for life, anytime you want it." Daniel nodded. "Maybe next Tuesday?" he said with a small smile. He whistled for Rex. The two of them stepped out into the afternoon air. The harbor breeze felt good. He felt the familiar weight of Rex at his side. He was still a soldier. His mission had just changed from war to peace. He walked down the sidewalk, the rhythmic click-clack of his crutches sounding like a slow march. He wasn't a victim. He was a survivor. He had kept his soul intact in a world that often tried to break it. He looked up at the sky and breathed. He thought about the men he had lost. He thought about the price they paid for this quiet afternoon. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life he had. Rex looked up at him, his tongue lolling out in a happy dog smile. He knew he had done a good job. He knew his alpha was safe and proud of him. As they turned the corner, the diner faded into the background. But the people inside would never forget that day. They would never forget the man. They would never forget the dog. They had learned a lesson that no textbook could ever teach. They had learned the true meaning of the word respect. If this story makes you want to treat others with more kindness and respect, type, "I will be kind." The story of the diner robbery hit the local news that evening. The headline read, "Retired SEAL and Hero, K-9 Thwart Armed Robbery." But Daniel didn't watch the report. He was in the park. He was busy playing with a tennis ball in a quiet corner with Rex. He didn't need the news. He didn't need the validation of a news anchor or a camera. He had the validation of his heart. He had the love of his most loyal companion. People in the neighborhood began to see things differently after that. They saw the veterans walking with service dogs and didn't see disabilities. They saw strength and unseen sacrifices. They realized that the people who have seen the most darkness are often the ones who fight for the light. Emily went on to become a nurse, graduating at the top of her class. She told the story of the Navy SEAL to every patient who felt like giving up. She taught them that a broken body doesn't mean a broken spirit. She taught them that a hero is someone who stands up even when their legs tell them no. She never forgot the man and his dog. Daniel and Rex continued to visit the diner every Tuesday at noon. The grumpy customers were long gone. They were replaced by a community of respect. People brought treats for Rex and shared quiet stories with Daniel. The lesson was simple but profound. True heroes don't always wear uniforms or have perfect bodies. Sometimes they look like the person you're sitting next to on the bus or at a diner. They are the people who have sacrificed everything and asked for nothing in return. They are the people who stand up when everyone else is too afraid. Rex lived a long, happy life by Daniel's side, guarding the choke points of their world until his very last day. He was a good boy until the end. Daniel never stopped being the man who fixed what was broken. The diner near the harbor still stands today, serving hot coffee and warm meals. If you go there on a Tuesday, you might see them. Don't pet the dog, he's still on duty. And don't stare at the man's legs. Look at his steady hands. Look at the peace in his eyes. You'll see the fire of a warrior. You'll see the soul of a man who knows exactly who he is and what he has done. Every life saved is a victory. Every act of kindness is a legacy. Daniel, Brooks, and Rex were still winning the war, one day at a time. They were the silent guardians of a world that finally learned to see them for who they truly were. They were the heroes we need, but rarely deserve. Daniel often thought about that day in the diner. He didn't think about the robbers or the violence. He thought about Emily's smile and the salute. He thought about the man who apologized. It reminded him that people can change. It reminded him that there is always hope for a better world. He looked at Rex, who was sleeping peacefully at his feet. He felt a deep sense of contentment. He had found his place in the world after the war. He was no longer a ghost. He was a man with a purpose. He was a man with a friend who would follow him into the dark and back again. As the sun set over the Boston harbor, Daniel leaned back in his chair. He was at peace, he was home, and he was ready for whatever came next. If you believe that kindness and respect are still important today, comment, "Respect veterans." And don't forget to subscribe to the channel SN Touching Stories for more emotional, true, and inspiring stories. Thank you for watching.